Warning! This is not a video about my own opinions on Bravely Default 2 as a whole. In the minutes following this disclaimer, you will hear me give my opinion specifically on the topic of grinding and how it relates to the previous entries in the series, the JRPG genre, and public perception. With that out of the way, let's begin. Bravely Default 2 is a Nintendo Switch game produced by Square Enix and developed by Silicon Studio. The first game in the series reached store shelves in 2012, followed by its sequel Bravely Second Endlayer. The original intent behind the Bravely Default series was to bring classic Final Fantasy style JRPG gameplay and storytelling to the modern era. It is very much a love letter to games from the 80s and 90s. This take on nostalgia does come with a few issues, those being weaknesses of JRPGs from those times. Bravely Default is not a series made to reinvent the wheel, as some game journalists or people may want to, or expect it to be. Bravely Default and Bravely Default 2 both have stories that are as tried and true as anyone can imagine. Amnesiac protagonist, a group of 4 individuals who get to know each other and save the world as a hero's party. In the case of this series, it also involves classic Final Fantasy crystals that they have to find and protect. It's standard affair and the majority knows and accepts this. That's exactly why they buy these games, because it's exactly what they expect from the franchise. However, like I said before, this decision to not reinvent the wheel and stick to the days of old has its negatives too. In the case of a JRPG, that can mean grinding. Grinding is a bothersome word for many people. It's a reason some may never touch a JRPG in the first place. Sitting in front of a screen, whittling away at enemies to increase your character's combat abilities without actually progressing in the game can understandably make anyone lose the will to play. Because of this, the genre has developed over time to make grinding less of an issue, and in some cases non-existent. Square Enix themselves have made grinding unnecessary in games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, and let's not forget the change from random encounters to monsters roaming on screen. Bravely Default and Bravely Second actually have a quality of life feature that allows the player to turn off enemy encounters altogether, or, if you want, increase them. It's a really nice feature and many were happy with it. Which begs the question, why did Silicon Studio remove this feature from the game and replace it with roaming monsters? So now, in Bravely Default 2 you can turn off enemy encounters, and you have to maneuver your way around random enemies in the overworld or in small corridor-shaped dungeons. This in itself is already hard enough. However, even if you battle every enemy in your way, you will still get absolutely decimated by all the bosses in the game. See where I'm going with this? There's a part of the public opinion that dislikes this approach of getting stuck in this loop. You battle all the enemies, then you get beaten by the boss. You keep on battling enemies, you get beat by the boss. It's time in and time out the same loop. And this gameplay loop can be very frustrating for people who are not used to it or just aren't a fan of it. The average player will then resort to grinding, and if it keeps happening, they will probably drop the game entirely. Up till now I may have sounded a bit negative on Bravely Default 2, but I want to change that for a moment. The game makes up for the difficulty and loss of a great quality of life feature through the battle system and job system. Game difficulty aside, which you can change mid-game, the player has a variety of options to either make grinding less of a pain or to completely nullify it. The battle system in Bravely Default 2 does modernize the classic turn-based combat of JRPGs a bit, the staple of the franchise of course being the brave and default options in battle. Defaulting is like a defend command. The character skips a turn by defending. By doing this they also get an extra brave point, which you need during your character's turn to use commands. This skill goes from -3 to +3. If your character's in the negative range, their turn will be skipped till they reach 0. And then there's the brave system, which allows characters to make multiple commands on their turn if they have enough brave points. This stacks up till 4 commands. So a character can go from 0 to -3 or +3 to -1 in one turn if the player feels up to it. This gives a player so many options that they can win against an overleveled boss if played smart. To add on to this is the job system, and this is where the game really shines in creativity. Bravely Default uses the old systems from classic Final Fantasy games to give your party different abilities and attacks. In the case of Bravely Default 2, the player can equip 2 at the same time, and any equipable skill they have learned while playing as that job will be usable even when the job itself is not equipped. This is where a creative mind can really break the game. I will be giving a job example, so skip to the time shown on screen if you don't want to be spoiled on any of the jobs and their abilities. The Beastmaster job is a job you get early on in the game. At first it may seem gimmicky and useless. Catching wild enemies and calling on them once during the battle to do their signature attack seems a little short. But this couldn't be further from the truth. The thief boss which follows in the dungeon after the Beastmaster can actually be made very simple by capturing a specific monster in the dungeon. The Minotaur is an axe-wielding monster that will do around 2000 damage to the boss. This is due to his weakness to axes. Capture 10 or so of these bad boys and you will beat him. Easily, considering you can have as many of the same job in your party as you want, the player could get 3 Beastmasters on their team and destroy the boss in one turn. Not to mention, the boss right after that can also be trivialized by a Beastmaster if they get a cat enemy called Kate Sif from a nearby dungeon to freeze the boss. Of course, there are also other jobs in the game that can trivialize enemies, be they on their own or by combining 2 jobs together. There are still a few options available to ease grinding in Bravely Default 2. EXP items which you get from side quests, sending your ship out to sail, chests or stealing them off enemies. Lining overworld enemies up near each other to make a chain battle occur, which gives increased EXP, money and job XP. The game is difficult, yes, and it can involve quite some grinding. However, people have been unfairly judging the game on that aspect by either going in expecting a complete modern take on classic JRPGs and or not using their creativity enough to go around the grinding. The game even has tutorials on the new jobs you get and which jobs they work well with, which it notifies you of early in the game as well. I am perfectly fine with the Bravely Default series being niche and not getting those 90+ Metacritic scores. However, I do not like it when people dislike the game for what it is not rather than what it's supposed to be. If someone comes to Bravely Default 2 and doesn't like it because the game isn't making a modern spin on classic JRPGs or offering a new, interesting story, then I just have to ask, what did you expect from this game? The trailers leading up to the game, not to mention the series history dating back from 2012, should have told you enough on what the game and the series is about. Now of course, some may be jumping in Bravely Default 2 as their start of the series and thus have little to no knowledge on the game beforehand. Even still, you could have done some research. The name alone should tell the consumer that there are other games in the series which you could check out to make sure this game appeals to you. Overall, I wouldn't say Bravely Default 2 has an actual grinding issue, primarily due to the series history and of course its appeal. But I do understand where people are coming from. Not everyone has either the time or interest to properly figure out all the systems of the game and how to abuse them. Then again, I'm the type of person to spend hours playing gacha games, so grinding has been ingrained in my tiny dumb brain. So, if people want to play a JRPG with little to no grinding, just play one of the hundreds out there. It's 2021. There are plenty of them out now. The Bravely Default series has a specific niche it wishes to fulfill. Don't judge it for what it doesn't even try to be. Judge it for what it is and how it stands up to the games that inspired them. Those were my personal thoughts on grinding in Bravely Default 2. Please share your opinions on the subject in the comments with each other. I'll be reading and responding as well. This is the first time I've made a video like this, and depending on the reception, I might make more of these rant type essays, videos, whatever you may want to call them. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.